Well, when I was about 2 weeks before leaving the MTC. It was when President Monson came out in the General Conference, and the mission age changed. And so, for elders it turned to 18 years old, and for sisters 19 years. And so when I got into the mission field, there was about, I think, 160 missionaries in the mission field, and about 30 of those were just sister, maybe 20, and the rest were elders. But by the time I left, there was 270 missionaries, and about 80 to 90 of those were sister missionaries. And so it just blew up. Everyone started service, and it was great. It was great to see the excitement in these new missionaries as they came into the mission field. But in the Sao Paulo East Mission, it used to go from the city of Sao Paulo, the eastern half of the city. It would go about, I wish I had a map to draw it for you, but it would go all the way out to the coast to the litoral, the beach, and it would go all the way up to a place called Guarachinguetá. And it would come back over to Guarachinguetá, just miss Campinas, and come back down to Sao Paulo. So it was like a rectangle. But halfway through my mission, actually about a quarter of the way through my mission, they took out the beach part of our mission all the way down, and they created a whole new mission. And that was, I think, the 8th mission I think they created in the state of Sao Paulo. But there are 2 temples in the state of Sao Paulo. The one's in Sao Paulo, where all the missionaries would go to when they're in the MTC, or if they're in the Sao Paulo mission. And then there's Campinas. I went to Campinas once when I was in the MTC because they were cleaning the Sao Paulo temple. But for the majority of my mission, we always went to the Sao Paulo temple because it was the closest. In my mission, there were, I think, 10 zones. And it was pretty consistent to one zone. There was a stake. And in that stake, it depended on how many wards there were. But it was on the average of 3 wards per 3 to 4 wards per stake. And there were a few branches in my last zone. There was 2 branches. And whoever was usually the bishop of these branches or wards, it was the pioneering family for how the church started in that area. And I remember in my second area, the bishop and his family had been there forever, and it was his father and his father, and they had really helped the church grow in San Miguel Paulista. And it wasn't he was called to be the bishop because his family had brought the church to that area. No, it was because he was the most worthy and able man to be the bishop. But you could tell there are very different families, and their families down there are huge. So like, you ask, hey, where are you going? He's like, oh, I'm going to my second cousin twice removed's house, and they're very connected. Doesn't matter how distantly related you are, they're big on family. And so at any activity, any family home evening, there would be at least 25 people there that were already members of the church, that were there to help you with your investigator. And so everyone in our mission would frequent the Sao Paulo temple. But my last zone, it's the zone farthest away from the mission home. They would go to the Campinas temple, which is about 2.5 hours away. And so that's how the geographical makeup. And the church, in Sao Paulo, they would either call it the Salt Lake City of Brazil, either that or Florianopolis, because there was 2 temples and 9 missions in Sao Paulo, the state. And so the church there is very strong. And they do have EFY there, but they call it something different every single year. It's either FESUY or some kind of program. And the youth there really love the missionaries. They love to help, and they bring their friend. I would talk to missionaries here in the States, and I was like, so how would you get someone to go to church? And they were like, okay, well, first we would go to a member's house. We would make the invitation. We would ask them we would follow up to see if they had actually invited that person, if the person was going to go to church. And they had about 13 or 14 or 15 steps to get someone to go to church. And they would ask, oh, how was it like in Brazil? I was like, oh, well, we would ask someone to bring themselves to church, and they would bring a friend, and we would meet the friend at church. We would ask them for their phone number, their address, and make an appointment to meet with that person the same day at church, and they would go meet them after church. And they would just look at me stunned. You did that? You were that what's the word, abrupt or frank with that person. Yeah, that's how they are with the church. They are very open to religion in Brazil. I think in my entire mission, I think I met about 3 people that did not believe in a supreme being or a deity. And so church for them down there, they can always point our church out because it's the most beautiful one with the little tower. They would always call it a temple. We're like, no, that's just our church. If you really want to see something beautiful, you go to one of our temples. And that's how the church really is different in Brazil. You know what a favela would be like, kind of like a slum sort of thing, kind of like a ghetto. And when you say you're from the east side of Zona Leste, they go, oh, they would say Corinthians. It's a soccer team down there. And I could closely resemble the Corinthians with probably the Oakland Raiders. If you could make that comparison of the fan base that the Oakland Raiders have, picture that, but a million times worse or better, depending on the way you're looking at it, with this soccer team. And they would instantly think, oh, you're from the east side? You're a Corinthian, aren't you? And I would always take my name tag and I find a sticker of the soccer team on the back, and I go, yeah, I'm a Corinthian. They go, oh, okay, all right, yeah, you're a good guy. And they were in Itaquera, this city it was a pretty interesting little city. It was dangerous, but it was a lot of fun. And that's where the Corinthians were based out of. And so because of the poverty of these people, they latched onto that soccer team, and whatever they did, they lived for that soccer team. And you saw full body tattoos of this soccer team. They lived through the soccer team, and there was this arch rival of Sao Paulo football club that they hated. They would fight in the streets. I mean, you couldn't go to a soccer game. You could tell a soccer game was going on because fireworks were going off. People were honking horns whenever someone made a goal, and so I think my east side of that mission, it was based around the soccer team of the Corinthians. It was, if you serve there, you're going to know the Corinthians. It's just outside the actual city limits of the big city of Sao Paulo. Like, there are like smaller cities, they call them bairros, which would be like a neighborhood, but it's on a larger scale. But the major one I would have served in is Guarulhos. It's where the international airport is. And so we would see airplanes taking off and landing, And my trainer only had a few months left, and he was like, this is the worst area to finish your mission in because there's just airplanes going everywhere. But I served in Guarulhos. I served in a city called Guaratinguetá. It's a pretty big city in the north of Sao Paulo, the state of Sao Paulo. Another pretty busy city was São Miguel Paulista. So these cities aren't, you can consider them cities, but everyone thinks of Sao Paulo, the city, you think you're actually in the city of Sao Paulo, but there is a different, Sao Paulo, like the city of Sao Paulo would be like an L shape, and Guarulhos would be in the L, like the crook of the L, and then all these other cities were outlying cities. So my biggest ones were probably Guarulhos and Guaratinguetá.